Welcome to the Engineering with Nature podcast. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has been working on the Engineering with Nature initiative since 2010, working and collaborating to advance the use of natural processes and systems to deliver a broad range of economic, environmental, and social benefits. EWN develops and implements nature-based solutions for water and infrastructure projects. It brings together a growing international community of practitioners, scientists, engineers, and researchers to harness the power of nature to innovate and solve problems and create sustainable solutions. This podcast tells their stories. Now here's your host, Sarah Thorne of Decision Partners.
Imagine if we truly understood and valued nature for all it provides to our lives. And imagine if the value of nature was at the center of all decision-making. Sounds utopian? Well, perhaps not. The first ever National Nature Assessment to truly understand how nature is faring in the United States and what it means to all of our lives is currently underway. And that's the focus of our discussion today. Welcome to Season 5, Episode 3. Todd Bridges, Senior Research Scientist for Environmental Science with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the National Lead of the Engineering with Nature program, and I are very pleased to welcome back Heather Tallis, who's the Assistant Director for Biodiversity and Conservation Sciences in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Heather joined us in Season 5, Episode 2, where we talked about the Opportunities to Accelerate Nature-Based Solutions report, which was released November 8th, 2022. She was a co-chair of that initiative, and she's the acting director for the National Nature Assessment with the U.S. Global Change Research Program. Welcome back, Heather.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
It's a really important discussion we're going to have today. As we've mentioned previously, on Earth Day this year in 2022, in April, President Biden issued an executive order 14072, and part of the many elements of that executive order included a commitment to what we're calling the National Nature Assessment. And if you think about advancing nature-based solutions, you could think about that as a stool. And the third leg that makes it a stool is really valuing nature. It begins with understanding the status, the benefits, the value that nature contributes every day to our lives. And that's the subject of the National Nature Assessment. And then the other leg being determining how to better measure and incorporate that value in our collective decision making. And then the third leg of the stool is identifying opportunities for making progress with nature-based solutions.
So let's talk about this National Nature Assessment, or NNA as it's called in short form. Heather, what's your role? And what are you hoping to accomplish?
So my role is that I'm the acting director of the National Nature Assessment. And so in that role, I get to work with a pretty amazing team of representatives of the 13 agencies that make up the U.S. Global Change Research Program. So that's the federal group that's conducting this assessment. And each of those agencies has a representative that we're working together with. I have a couple of main jobs in this role. One is to make sure that we produce an assessment that responds to, the task that we were given. And the other, really importantly, is to make sure that we create an assessment that is truly useful for the American people. And so the first part of that, responding to the task we were given, is to give a full picture of the state of nature in the United States, and to help share what we understand about how nature matters to our lives in a diverse set of ways. So specifically, we were asked to take stock of the lands, waters, and wildlife across the nation, and how they connect to important parts of our lives. So for example, what does nature mean to our economy? How is nature interacting with our own health, both our physical and our mental health? What does changes in nature mean for our own national security and, for example, environmental justice? So these are big, important issues that people grapple with every day. And it's part of our task here to paint the picture of what we know about those connections. All that sounds very important to me. Of course, I'm a scientist and I like to understand what we know about nature. But this assessment isn't for me or for the rest of us that are conducting it. It's really for the American public. And so we have a really important job here to make sure that we are listening, starting now, to what the public wants to know about nature in the nation, and making sure that we create an assessment that answers those kinds of questions.
It's a really exciting opportunity, but it must also be a little bit daunting. It's a huge, huge task. Heather, what do you hope to learn from nature?
Well, we've already learned quite a lot, and so we want to make sure we're sharing all of that with everyone. We think it's really important to share what we know about how nature can be a part of the solutions that we need to major challenges that we face every day. So climate change is a great example, something that's becoming ever more present in pretty much everyone's lives. And we know that nature can be up to a third of the solution that we need to draw greenhouse gases down from the atmosphere, as one example. And we know that nature can be part of how we think about infrastructure. There's been major investments this last year passed through Congress and signed by the president for how we can repair roads and bridges and make our infrastructure resilient and strong for the years ahead. And nature can actually be part of building that kind of resilient infrastructure. We can actually now think about dunes and wetlands and forests as part of our infrastructure. They can, slow down waves along the coast and protect us from storms. They can cool the air like air conditioners, and they can even, reduce the risk of wildfire. So these are lessons we've already learned, that nature can be part of solutions for these major challenges that we face. And so part of what we hope to share with the nation through this assessment is that information that we already know, and bring it to bear on the way people think about their own lives and their own choices.
I mean, one thing we can add here is that there have been other important assessments and reviews that have focused on nature and the status of nature. So you might ask, why another? And part of my response would be timing is everything. Well, okay, maybe it's not everything, but it's a lot, timing. And I would say that there are 3 C's that make the timing particularly right for this assessment. And the 3 C's are climate change and COVID. And climate change, as Heather just pointed out, is going on. And it relates, of course, to the planet and to nature. But importantly, I think climate change is increasingly a kitchen table issue, that phrase. It's because people are experiencing it for themselves. They're seeing it happen around them. I can recall my childhood and formative years growing up in the central part of California, and I have no recollection of wildfire affecting my life at all in that period of time. But yikes, my California family members, this is a part of their more or less everyday life during the dry and hot times of the year. And COVID too, as some of the listeners know, or people who go to the Engineering with Nature website, Anita and I have spent a lot of time on the road and at national parks, in particular visiting several national parks in the summer of 2021, where people were emerging from their COVID hibernation, if you will. And I'm telling you, the parks were so wildly busy with people. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we just don't realize how important something is until you lose access to it. And losing access to nature, as I saw tangibly at the parks, people were wanting it, craving it, desiring it, and were searching it out.
And during the COVID years, we now started giving out prescriptions for people to go for a walk in the woods, which I think is absolutely brilliant. It's amazing that we have to give out a prescription to tell people to go for a walk in the woods, but we have to do what we have to do.
The modern way. Yeah.
Exactly. So Heather, talk a little bit about some of these challenges, because everything that you've been talking about is music to our Engineering with Nature ears. Talk about some of the challenges that we face and how nature is a solution to some of those challenges.
Yeah, well, I think as Todd was just drawing out, we've seen how nature can be part of the solution to some of the risks we're increasingly facing with climate change. A really great example is coastal habitats like dunes and marshes and coral reefs that are big structures. And, we might think about playing in them or around them and enjoying them for a weekend at the beach or fishing. But even while we're not looking, those same habitats really slow down storm waves, including in big storms that we're increasingly seeing and experiencing along all of our coasts. And so that's one kind of example of how nature can be part of a solution to climate change. But as Todd just mentioned also, maybe we think less often about how nature affects our health. We did see an increased, if quiet, definitely present recognition that just having a place to go and have a break can really be critical for our mental health. And some people, and increasingly, go outdoors for exercise, physical health, a chance to move their bodies, use their bodies. And evidence is increasingly showing that whether or not we're thinking about it, time in nature is affecting our physiology, usually in beneficial ways. So we have increasingly more and more evidence about how exposure to nature, time in nature, and even passive things that nature does, whether or not we know it, are really helping solve some of our big challenges like climate change.
So Heather, let's talk about the process that you're using to design this assessment. It's a big task and it's over several years. It's very open, it's very inclusive, and I understand you're asking for input from individuals and all kinds of different organizations across America.
Yes, this is critically important. We truly want to hear from everyone as much as possible. We've been asked by the U.S. Global Change Research Program's leadership to make sure that this is a use-inspired assessment. That means that the use of the assessment, what people want to gain from it, really has to drive what we do here. From the beginning, it has to drive the questions we ask, the design of the assessment, and what we produce in the end. We certainly don't want any more reports that just sit on a shelf. We absolutely here need to know how Americans want to use this assessment, what Americans want to know about their nature, and design an assessment that's really responsive to those questions and those needs.
What kinds of input are you asking for at this point?
Well, we're really starting here by listening. We have a public comment period that's open right now. Anyone can give us input as an individual or through an organization. If you're part of a professional society, a university, a corporation, a network of people that share ideas, anyone can give us input. And we're asking some really big open questions right now because we're just at the beginning of this assessment and we really have an open mind about what it can be. So some of the questions that we really want to hear what you think about are, what does nature mean to you? We know there are many different ways to experience nature. We know everyone comes from a different way of thinking about nature. There are different perspectives and we'd like to hear them all. We also ask questions about what you want to know about nature in the U.S., how it's changing or how it affects your life. We've also asked what decisions people think this assessment should help support. Of course, it's nice to have information and knowledge, and in many cases, we really want to make decisions that are based on evidence and the information that we have. So what are those decisions that we could really help inform? And of course, this is an assessment of knowledge. And so we're curious what other information that's already out there, what data, what stories, what other assessments exist that we should be drawing from. So we're not replicating something that's already there and really adding value with this new assessment. And finally, we really want to know how you want to hear about this assessment. What kinds of products do you want to see? How do you want to engage with what we learn through this assessment? Again, some people respond well to reports. Some people like apps and interfaces and websites. Some people like documentaries and other forms of artistic expression. We're open here to hearing what you all think. What's the best way you can learn from what we're able to pull together in this assessment?
And what Heather's described makes this assessment interesting and encouraging on many levels that will make the assessment, from my point of view, very impactful. Scientists spend a lot of time talking to each other. Really, I mean, those of us who have been schooled and work in the sciences have that experience. We go to conferences with other people just like us, and we talk to each other, and we can make a lot of progress that way. But the National Nature Assessment hasn't been designed like that, and I think for very positive reasons, as Heather outlined, because nature touches everybody, literally everybody, in some fashion or another, and it seems only right and wholesome, I guess, that everybody would have some opportunity to provide input on what the National Nature Assessment is.
Absolutely. I thought it was really interesting that you're asking people to share how they define nature. It's something, we all talk about. It's something I guess we think we're all talking about the same thing, but I think you're going to get a lot of different kinds of perspectives. Can you talk a bit about why you're asking that question, Heather?
Sure. I mean, you said a little bit of it yourself, right? Everybody thinks about nature differently. And while there are many academic definitions of nature or biodiversity, we want to be aware of those. We want to be thinking about those, but we know those aren't the whole picture of what nature means in America now. So we really want to hear how people experience nature, how they think about it, and how they define it in their own terms. We know that, for example, for some people, nature is the park down the street, where you play soccer, or where you have your birthday parties. To other people, we are nature, right? We are one and the same. Nature is the root of our existence. For a lot of tribal nations and Native communities in the United States, that's certainly a starting point for some of their thinking, and for others as well. And for some people, nature is a way of life. It's how they make a living, right? For fishers and ranchers and foresters and many others. Nature isn't just a place to go play or something to think about on weekends. It's their job, their way of making a living. And of course, for many Americans, nature's in national parks and wide open spaces, and it is our playground and where we go to rest and rejuvenate. All of those are valid experiences, right? And there's a really wide range of ways we think about nature. And again, many ways we don't think about nature that are a part of what some people define. So for example, nature is our source of water, right? And the starting point for most supply chains that deliver us things like food and clothes, and even technology, things we touch and use and rely on every day. So we really want to hear all of these aspects and ways people might think about nature, and use those to really guide and inform what we include in this assessment.
When I was reading your questions, I was thinking I was actually spending time with my 4-year-old great niece. And I was thinking about how she would answer that question. And it would probably be an elaborate discussion with pictures. Are you going to include children in this phase of the assessment?
So the public comment is open now to absolutely anybody. So children are invited now already to provide their thoughts, and also welcome teachers. If they'd like to organize their students or help their students understand this opportunity exists and understand how they can share their thoughts, they're welcome to now already. We've also made clear in the request for information that if writing is not your favorite way of communicating, we're happy to accept input in voice recordings or in videos if you can post them somewhere online and send us a link. Our interface doesn't allow us to take big videos directly, but if you want to use a different form of communication, we can receive things by fax. We can take things through the web platform that's there through the U.S. Global Change Research Program. But we'd also love to hear stories in voice recordings or videos as well. Just really encouraging people to share for us in ways that make sense for them and help them express what they care about here.
I hope you get lots of people taking you up on the offer, and I hope you get lots of teachers. I think this would be a marvelous project for a class. So I want to talk about the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge, because that's a really important component of this assessment. How do you plan to weave in the Indigenous input into the development of the design of the assessment?
We are actually in the process of figuring that out now. So we know absolutely that Indigenous knowledge is critical to this assessment, and we want to make sure we develop a process that's welcoming of Indigenous knowledge holders and supportive of an appropriate and acceptable use of Indigenous knowledge and the expression of Indigenous knowledge in this assessment. So we're in the process of figuring out what that looks like. We're in the great position to be developing this now because the White House just released last week the first ever guidance on Indigenous knowledge for federal agencies and for incorporating and thinking about Indigenous knowledge in federal decisions. So we'll be designing a process that follows closely along with that guidance and benefiting from that first of its kind resource. We'll also be asking tribal nations and Native communities directly for their ideas through tribal consultation and through additional engagements. And we are really hoping that they will work with us to shape this assessment into something that reflects all of the knowledge that's relevant to nature in the United States, including Indigenous knowledge.
There's so much to be learned from viewing problems and opportunities from different perspectives or angles, or if you prefer a different optical metaphor, through different lenses. And from my point of view, I've been doing some of my own personal reading and study and visiting people and places to understand more about those who came before. And one of the places I visited in the Engineering with Nature on the Road series in the summer of 2021 during the Heartland tour was a place called Cahokia, just outside of present-day St. Louis, Missouri. And Cahokia was the center of the Mississippian culture in North America between about the year 1000 and the year 1200. That city had an estimated population of at least 15,000 people. And that is comparable in size to what the population was of London, England at the same period of time. And when I learned that fact, it sort of blew my mind when you think about that. I mean, everybody has heard of London, England, but relatively few, I would suggest, of Cahokia. But in fact, it was the largest city in North America until about the year 1800, in fact. So there were plenty of people here before, and they had a presence and they had a way of engaging and of working with nature, and we need to understand that more and more.
I think it'll be so interesting to see what you learn through that process. I'm almost all the way through reading the book called Braiding Sweetgrass. And one of the things that the author talks about is naming, knowing the names of all the plants and the animals, because they're your relatives. And if you know the names of things, you have a different relationship with them. And it just really struck a chord with me. It's, I think you're going to find a lot of really interesting things like that hopefully will help shape your assessment and how you translate that back to, the broader community across America. I think it'll be really, really interesting. Todd, I do want to talk to you about your role in the development of the assessment.
Yeah, the National Nature Assessment is undertaken through the work of a federal steering committee, which has been charged with delivering the assessment in 2026. I think that's the year, Heather. Yes.
That's
okay,
correct.
Good. Whew, got that part right. And the federal steering committee includes representatives from different relevant federal agencies. And I and my colleague Kyle McKay are representing the Department of Defense on the federal steering committee. And, why the DoD? Well, the Department of Defense has about 5,000 installations or sites across the country and around the world that occupy 25 million acres. 25 million acres of land and water. And I said, wow, that's a lot of nature. Mm-hmm. And the Department of Defense has many programs and makes many investments in natural resource conservation. and is also now focused on how nature-based solutions can be deployed to support, if you will, comprehensive resilience at our facilities and the surrounding communities for our facilities. So there are many ways in which the Department of Defense is relevant to and I think in support of the National Nature Assessment, and Kyle and I look forward to contributing to the effort.
It's interesting when you think about the Department of Defense being a custodian of nature for that much land. That's incredible. Before we wrap up, talk a little bit about what's next, what's ahead. I know you've got end of March deadline. Tell our listeners how they can get involved.
So we do have a public comment period open now through the end of March. If you'd like to contribute to that, you can go online and search for the Federal Register and the National Nature Assessment. You can also go to the homepage for the U.S. Global Change Research Program. They have a newsletter where they'll share alerts and other opportunities for public engagement. So you can sign up there and stay in the loop and be updated frequently about where we are in the process and what more you can do to contribute and participate. And we'll also hold several public engagement sessions that'll be announced there, and tribal consultations as well. As I mentioned, this period that we have open now through March will be just the first chance. People have to engage on this assessment. And then as we go and have an idea, responding to all the input that we get of what the products might be, we'll share those ideas back with the public and ask for more input on the ideas as they're evolving. And then we'll also call for authors, people to be directly engaged in producing this assessment. And that will also go through a public process. So please do watch these websites and newsletters and also social media. We'll be sharing updates and announcements and opportunities for engagement along the way.
Nature's value is multifaceted, like the many surfaces of a cut and polished diamond. There's no single insightful or dominating view or source of understanding or knowledge. And the National Nature Assessment, as Heather has just indicated, in so many ways is truly national, right? It's truly national to try to collect input and insights from as broad a cross-section of the country as can be achieved in an assessment. I think it's just exciting to be a part of something that has that as its approach.
Yeah, it's such an important undertaking, and it's really unprecedented to have a national nature assessment of this scale and scope. And I do hope that our listeners will get involved and share their perspectives on nature, its value to them and their lives. We'll certainly include all the references, Heather, in our show notes. So thank you, Heather. Your leadership on this initiative is really, really critical. And boy, do you ever have a big job ahead of you. 2026 is going to be right around the corner.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
thinking as a researcher and a scientist, I'm thinking of how you're going to code and analyze all that data. It's going to be a big job. Yes. We look forward to hearing from you about what you learn and what you really find out about how Americans value nature through this process. So thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you very much. I agree. It is a big job, but I'm really lucky I'm not doing it alone. We do have our 13 agency counterparts collaborating and a whole nation that we're making something new with here. So I'm very excited about this. I appreciate the chance to talk with you and all of your audience. I welcome you all to engage. And please, if you've got a burning question about nature in the U.S., we want to hear it.
Yeah, I want to thank Heather, too. I mean, from my observation, she's just doing a superb job of leading this effort. And on the Federal Steering Committee, it's brought together colleagues that many of whom, hadn't interacted or met before. And Heather and her team are doing a great job and getting us kind of comfortable and engaging with each other. And in fact, Heather's been starting off with little nature thoughts of encouragement at the beginning of our meetings. And everybody has been so encouraged by this process because everybody on the committee has been working with and to support nature for so many years. And here we are coming together for such a grand purpose as understanding the value of nature. So thanks, Heather.
Awesome. Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Heather. And to all of you, thank you so much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and we hope you'll join us again when we talk about engineering with nature.
The EWN podcast was developed by Sarah Thorne and Jeff King, Deputy National Lead, Engineering with Nature Initiative, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. For more information, you can visit our website, engineeringwithnature.org. The EWN podcast is produced by Eye Contact Productions for the Engineering with Nature program within the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'm Dave Trafford.